In the name of one God, Creator, Redeemer, Sanctifier, and Friend. Amen. Some of you may wonder about the controlled chaos that we've introduced into the gospel reading. So I thought maybe I'd just take a moment and say, we want the children to know that they're included in our worship. We want them to hear the story, and they're all going out now to hear it in their language, in a way, at a Godly Play session. So that's, if you're new to St. Andrews and think we're crazy, we are. And that's just something we're trying to kind of wrap into our service and see how that goes. This morning, we hear a beautiful passage from Isaiah. I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. God gives this word of hope through the prophet Isaiah, but only after painting a poetic and vivid picture of disaster in verses 1 through 16 of chapter 65 in Isaiah. If you read that portion, it's sort of death and destruction, but it's really God saying to God's people, you've turned away from me, and I'm not happy about this, so I need to do a new thing. Something has to change, and I, the Lord, your God, love you so much that I'm going to bring about this change, this new heaven and new earth. So through the voice of the prophet, God laments, you forsake the Lord, you who forget my holy mountain, you who set a table for fortune and fill cups of mixed wine for destiny. I will destine you to the sword. Well, there's an image for you, sort of the polar opposite of the lion and the lamb and the wolf lying down together in the peaceable kingdom. It's a dramatic shift of images given us by the prophet so that we will understand God's everlasting love and his need to be in continual covenant to create new heavens and new earth. One of the things that came to my mind in one of those mental leaps that I make when I'm meditating on these things was quilting. I love quilts and quilting. In fact, when I'm not here, you might find me at home quilting, making quilts. The colors, the shapes, the creativity all draw me because you make something new. You make something interesting and something useful. I'm particularly fond of antique quilts made hundreds of years ago in times when fabrics were hard to come by and often obtained from worn clothing. Thread and light to work by were in short supply. Cutting and measuring tools were made from whatever was available. In a particular way, a quilt, in this sense, is a new creation. I think about my brothers and sisters, the Amish, the Old Order Mennonites, who to this day, as you know, drive the horse and buggy, who don't use the kind of lighting we use, but whose gift, the women put together these amazing pieces of art. Old and worn fabrics can be used. New, colorful, and interesting fabrics can be cut into squares and triangles and rectangles and pentagons and heptagons and all kinds of shapes. And then they come together in the hand of the quilter who creates something beautiful, something new. Quilts are above all practical art. They're to be used. Quilts offer comfort as well as beauty. There are many traditions associated with quilting. Among them, if a couple is being married, the women get together and make a quilt for the new couple. Often we make quilts for new babies or for the sick or the lonely, so that they will have something warm and comforting and beautiful. Quilters love to give their work away. Some antique quilts tell stories. One in particular caught the attention of Alice Walker. She describes it in her book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. In the chapter by the same title, Alice Walker describes her mother's life and work. Her mother was a tenant farmer. And Alice then made this connection with a quilt she discovered in the Smithsonian. She wrote, "My mother made all the clothes we wore, even my brother's overalls. She made all the towels and sheets we used. She spent the summers canning vegetables and fruits. She spent the winter evenings making quilts enough to cover all our beds." Then Walker asks the question, when, you will ask, did my overworked mother have time to know or care about feeding the creative spirit? The answer is so simple, she continues, that many of us have spent years discovering it. We have certainly looked high when we should have looked high and low. For example, in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., there hangs a quilt unlike any other in the world. In fanciful, inspired, and yet simple and identifiable figures, it portrays the story of the crucifixion. It is considered rare beyond price. Though it follows no known pattern of quilt making, and though it is made of bits and pieces of worthless rags, it is obviously the work of a person of powerful imagination and deep spiritual feeling. Below this quilt, I saw a note that says it was made by an anonymous black woman in Alabama 100 years ago. So how in the world do I make the leap from this quilt to our reading from Isaiah and our gospel? The quilt tells the story of the central mystery of our faith, the crucifixion. Jesus tells the assembled community that things will not be easy. Jesus describes an atmosphere of challenge and even persecution, but assures the believers that God is with them and will strengthen them in time of need. It seems to me that a quilt depicting the crucifixion, made of bits and pieces of all that the Creator had, tells the story of love and hope in the midst of what must have been desperate poverty and oppression. When Isaiah sings this song of new creation, the prophet elaborates on the components of all that will be made new. Isaiah speaks a word of hope to a captive people, assuring them that God will give life and prosperity. There will be a time of release and a time of peace. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox. The serpent, its food, shall be dust. But there will be peace on my holy mountain. Our spiritual lives can be a bit like quilting. We can take bits and pieces and put them together into something new that tells the story of God's love and care for us. So what bits and pieces will you put together to make something new in your life? More directly, for our community, we are in a process of sharing information, of understanding ourselves in a new way. We are taking the bits and the pieces of who we are as believers in Jesus Christ, we are looking closely at the worn fabric of our life. We are also looking to learn what new we will create and what work we may be called to do. We are looking at new colors and shapes in our ministries and wondering how it will all come together. And so we hear God's word to us this morning as a word of encouragement. There is work to be done, but I, the Lord your God, am with you in all time and in all places, and will help you to put the bits and pieces together. Behold, I am making all creation new. Something new will be born. It is our role to pray, to discern, to get the bits and pieces together, to make something new in our life that will point us in the direction God calls us to go. One other little unknown story about quilts. During the time of the Underground Railroad, when slaves were trying to find their way to freedom, if they saw a quilt with the flying geese pattern, which has all the triangles pointing in a particular direction, it would tell them where the next safe place was. Think about that. The scraps that were given to women to make quilts, put together to lead to freedom and to peace. We are called to put our lives together as a community, as individuals, to lead the way, to show God's liberating love to the world. Amen.